Thanks so much. I'm super excited to be here. Hugh Seaton, I'm managing director of AI Edge. We are an AI consulting company, so I work with contractors, everything from training to AI strategy to implementation and everything in between. Been at this for about 10 years, back when AI was not as cool as it is now, but I thought it was cool at the time. And I've worked with, as I say, a bunch of contractors and some associations and built a bunch of things myself. And, excited to be here. And if you guys have questions along the way, whether it's what we're talking about or something that it kind of sparks, pop it in the Q&A. We'll get to it.
Fantastic. Thanks, Hugh, for joining me today. My name is David Pimiskern, and I work on the product team here at Bridget. For those of you who may not be aware, we recently launched the first agents into our workforce planning product. I hope we have a few customers in the crowd and some other members of the industry who are excited to learn more about agents more broadly in the construction space. And Hugh, just thank you so much for joining us today. I know we're going to have a pretty exciting conversation about all things agents. And so, with that being said, I figured that we should start from the basics, Hugh. So, can you tell the audience a little bit about what actually makes something an agent?
Yeah. So it has become one of those words that means a lot of different things. If you go into Copilot, what they call an agent is really just kind of a chatbot that has some materials or some content that it's connected to. The kind of classic term of an agent, and if you think about what an insurance agent is, it's or a whatever agent outside of AI, it's something or someone that's acting on your behalf. So really what an agent should mean is it's doing things for you, actions, as opposed to just a resource or whatever. That's a better way of thinking about what agents are. And what makes them good at what they do and what makes them more limited than people sometimes think they can be is not everything can be turned into an agent. You need to have a way for the AI to know that it got it right. So not to get too into it in terms of what that means, but essentially you're saying, I'm going to trust this agent to do something. And that means that you need to be able to define what the thing is, but also what good looks like so the agent doesn't need to bring it back to you. Now, a lot of agents are short steps, and Bridget is a great example where it's not like it's sending it off to your customer or whatever. So you're still a human still seeing it, but you don't you want the agent to do as good a job as possible. So things that require judgment, things that are open-ended, things that have lots and lots of different possible inputs or whatever are really hard to make an agent for. So typically when we're seeing agents, they tend to be pretty narrow tasks that have the way we like to say it is if you could list all of the inputs, you may not use every input every time, but if you could list all the inputs, in other words, it's a finite number, and you could write down what good looks like or give it an example of what good looks like, what finished looks like. That's most of what you need to make an agent. Obviously, there's software and all the rest in there, but that's a pretty good rule of thumb to say, could we make an agent out of this? And then you think about what you do in your own work. Lots of things are too general for that, which is why you rarely see agents that are full workflows. Usually there's steps in a workflow, and you can string them together for sure. But usually you're taking a small thing and doing what I just said is making sure you have all of the inputs and that you've defined what good looks like. It doesn't have to be only one definition. It could be five. In fact, a lot of times an agent will have a number of different evaluations, which is kind of the thing they use to verify that it was good. But nevertheless, it's possible to do that. And again, lots of things are too open-ended and too judgment-based and too complicated to reasonably do an agent. So that's a good way of thinking about what agents are now. And you're definitely hearing on the top end agents that will do more complicated things from folks like the Databricks and so on. It's pretty hard to get really general agents working. I know, again, if you're on LinkedIn, you'll hear all sorts of claims and stuff like that. But the practical reality is the best way to think about agents right now is smaller things that you're automating, which again, you can have 4 or 5 of them in a row, but thinking in terms of smaller steps that you've automated is about where most applications are now.
Yeah, that's great, Hugh. And I think as we, thought about how we could develop agents in our product, it's exactly what you were mentioning there around that multi-step decision making. you used to have a travel agent, and now you can have an assistant that can book your whole trip for you. And so I think that when we start to carve out those, tasks that need to be completed, it's an agent that can act and do more than just answer, a basic query like something that you put into, Claude or ChatGPT. They're actually starting to do something for you, which is an exciting horizon that I think we're all entering, and especially across the construction industry. There's lots of opportunities for where agents can start to add value. And so, Hugh, I'd love to know, what are you starting to see in construction companies that are incorporating agents, and how are they doing so in a valuable way?
Yeah, it's not as intense as you might think. And by that I mean, if you think about what I just said, where you know the inputs and you've gone and created a document that says here's what good looks like. We're still in a place where lots of I'll take what you asked, is have they built them on their own versus working with a Bridget or something like that. Most of the agents that I'm seeing are coming from a platform that is able to do the pieces I just said. They know the process, they know the step really well. They very, I don't know, easily, but they definitely, it's achievable for them to create those two pieces, which is again all the inputs and then something on the other end that says here's what good looks like. You're starting to see that more. It very much, what I'm seeing is steps that are supporting like drudgery, things that are usually pretty well defined. They tend to be things you don't want to do, but it hasn't penetrated companies that much in terms of their own teams doing it. It's absolutely happening, don't get me wrong, but it's a little more rare right now than I think it will be. And I say that because the tooling to do it out in the wild is not that great. Microsoft has some things for sure, whether it's Copilot Studio and Power Automate and some of these other things. And often you're finding people are just doing steps. Again, the term agent gets used really loosely. There are a lot of people that are making Copilot agents, which really, again, are just a chatbot with some resources, and that's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But what we're talking about here is automations, either little ones or not so little ones. So it's out there. It's a little early for a team that isn't a software company to do this, because someone has to understand what I just said about the evaluation and the what good looks like at the end, and then make one. And the other piece, you're still talking about software, which means the first pass doesn't really work. Or if it does, it's really narrow, and then someone tries it and it breaks. So you're still going to be in an iterative loop where you keep noodling it until it performs. And it's not like people couldn't do that. That's just a new skill, and it's not something that every GC or trade contractor has, in terms of people that know how to do that and have the time to do that and are given the time to do that. So I think the tooling needs to keep getting a little bit better, and whether it's on Microsoft or on some other place. And there's certainly enough startups that are trying to make the tooling easier. It's just, okay, that's another point solution that a contractor has to have. So you'll see it as it continues to get more and more sophisticated. The other piece is both ChatGPT and Claude, and to some degree Gemini, although most people aren't on that for the business. They have things that are agent-like. They're not quite there. Behind the scenes, they do have agents. They just aren't something you can control. So like deep research is an example. So I think it's early days. I think people are finding more value right now in AI as a resource than AI as an agent. And I think this is a great time to be talking about this, because we're getting better. The models are getting better at needing less when it comes to that evaluation, and the tooling is getting better. So no one is behind when it comes to AI, and they're definitely not behind when it comes to agents. I will say it is all moving so quickly, though, that it's a good thing to be paying attention to and playing around with. And honestly, you can go ask any of ChatGPT, Claude, whatever, and say, hey, I want an agent that does this for me. How would I do that? And it'll often give you step by step how you can build something, and even draft up what the evaluation looks like. You just have to know that you're in for some hours of revising and testing and revising, and then finding people that didn't build it to test it, because users are fantastic at finding the things that you didn't think of. So yeah, it's early, but not that early. It's still kind of making its way through, and I think that IT teams and or innovation teams, this is a muscle they haven't been exercising for a long time. So I think people are feeling their way a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I want to double click on the point that you mentioned just of no one is behind, but it really is that like period where we all have this opportunity to adapt to this new technology, to continue to learn how it can be incorporated into our day-to-day workflows. And when I think about, the pain points that our customers experience through workforce planning, there's a lot of opportunities to kind of ease some of that pain, to make some of that decision making a little bit easier. But in order to do that, people have to be willing to try the agents. They have to go in, they have to do a little bit of experimentation, whether that's in a point solution that you're using or whether that's in your co-pilot. And I think that even just internally in my own learning experience over the last year, couple years, it's been important for me to carve out that time to explore, to do some validation, some testing, lots of iteration, that's for sure, to ensure that the agent ultimately works for me in the best possible way to deliver some value.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that is interesting is unlike any other, I've been in one form of technology or another for 30 years. I've never seen leadership as open to hearing about what someone's tried as with AI. I run into this in surprising places where most contractors have a couple of people that are, weekend coders or just people that are really into this. And when they come to leadership and say, hey, I just built this thing. And, of course, after they get past the, are you being safe with it? They're excited to hear it. And they often will, do different things to get other people to try it and so on. So the interesting thing here is as people are trying things, it's not like earlier technologies where you maybe bought a software, you tried this or whatever. In this case, there is an anxiety, for lack of a better word, at the leadership level, where they are unusually interested in hearing that some of their people who really know the business have said, I built this thing and it's giving me time back. Because that, I think, at the end of the day, everybody's looking for not so much efficiency, although that would be wonderful. It's how are we spending less time on pretty low value added steps? And can we automate as much of that as possible? So I have more time to think about the thing I'm working on or go talk to customers or go walk the job site, whatever it might be. But, burning 2-3 hours on silly stuff. I mean, think of how often you're spending time on gathering things and checking them against each other or God forbid, formatting something. A lot of that stuff is automatable in a way that may or may not be literally an agent, but thinking in those terms, again, whether it's an agent or whether it's just a chatbot kind of doing stuff for you because you told it what to do, a lot of that is, if you think about it as giving you time back, that's a really good way of looking at your job and saying, what are the dumbest things I'm burning time on? And can we maybe think about an agent or some AI implementation that can make that either faster or more, or more accurate or whatever it might be. But agents, that is where I think you're going to find, that's what everybody wants, right? Is how are we getting time back from the things that we know really aren't, they have to happen, you have to do them, but they're not really adding direct value to the customer.
Yeah, and Hugh, I'm curious when you have been, working with a lot of members of the industry. You talked about the time savings piece of where you've seen value delivered, but on the job site and in the back office, how have you seen those applications?
Yeah, the job site is a tougher one because you're not at a desktop unless you're in the trailer. And what I think is an overlooked way that either an agent or, again, a co-pilot agent can be really helpful is people forget that you can use the camera on your phone. So I think that's a big unlock for getting field buy-in where they can take a picture of something and ask let's just for the moment call it Copilot or ChatGPT, it doesn't matter, to either go access content that you've given it earlier because it's still the same system, even though it's on your phone, it's still connected to what is in the on your laptop. So it can go look and check specs for you, or look something up, or translate something, and so on and so forth. So for the field, I think that is an early unlock to start to show that this is valuable. It's almost the opposite of Comtech 15 years ago when it was mostly accounting systems that were made by people who are used to looking at spreadsheets, and it drove people nuts because the UI was terrible in the field. This is the opposite, where it's actually really good for being out in the world and connecting where people are back to their information and some intelligence. On the office side, you're seeing a lot of processes that are heavily, I mean, again, this is probably surprising to no one, but you're seeing a lot of processes that are heavy documents, and a little bit less than I would have thought on the finance side, because that's all numbers. It should be perfect, but the numbers are a little bit scarier, and let's not let AI near that yet. So and often it's like, hey, just let the accountants do what they do. But I think you're seeing things like submittal review. I know you're seeing things like submittal review and things related to specs. Drawings are getting better. Automated takeoff has been around for a while, and it's getting really good. It's not so great at some of the MEP just because things are so small or they're not even on the drawing. But for a lot of other things, especially when it comes to walls and so on, automated takeoff is getting really good. That isn't something in a chatbot that needs to be vertical AI, just like Bridget. Some of what you guys do is just, well, most of what you guys do really requires the infrastructure to manage the data and all that. But nevertheless, you're starting to see that kind of thing. So not surprisingly, it's very document heavy. Of course, everybody's transcribing meetings and getting meeting notes, which is, I think, an enormous unlock. And the ability to take the transcripts from the last 5 meetings and ask questions and really start to include time in a way that no one has memory or time for, like who's really going to go back and look at the meeting notes from 5 meetings ago? But if you could, in as quickly as uploading a document, you could start to say, hey, did we miss anything? Did something get brought up but never assigned to somebody? Did we forget to follow up on something? So on. I find the other one that's interesting, and this is a little more field than it is office, is to-dos. I mean, if you think about it, running a job is a million to-dos. And whether it's on your phone or somewhere else, having AI help you with management of to-dos, especially some of the smaller ones, I think is another unlock that sounds small, but it really drives people nuts because it sticks in your head. You're like, what did I forget? So feeling like you've got a little bit more handle on that, I think, is as much an emotional as it is an efficiency unlock.
Yeah, and I think there's those opportunities like all over the place, just in the small moments of where can you get the context from that meeting, get the context from those drawings, and start to source that data together into a centralized place. Because at the end of the day, the more data that agents have, the better decisions, the more context they have, and the better decisions that they can suggest. Um,
Actually, Dave, let me double click on that one there. So one of
yeah,
the things that you'll hear people say is you can't do AI if you don't have your data in order. And the problem with that statement is the people who are listening to it are probably spending, an hour a day on ChatGPT or whatever. So they're already using AI and their data is where it is. I
yeah.
think it's important to differentiate what we mean by what you can do with AI and what different quality of organizational data gives you. If it's just one person using a chatbot with their documents and their process, you're probably fine right like you are. Fine right like you are. You just have to be careful that you're, prompting right and all this stuff that we've been hearing about for a year. If you're at the kind of project span, again, you're probably all right, especially if you're sticking to systems of record and so on. The thing that you don't hear a lot about in really anywhere, but definitely not in construction, is the almost promised land of an agent that can do things across the business. And that is maturing across industries, not just in construction. It really is, apart from a couple places like finance where everything's a transaction, it's really hard for most companies, and construction, of course, is an extreme here, to have consistent, well-structured data across the company. People have been talking about that for 10 years, and it was like, well, I can, we have meetings every week. I don't need the dashboard and the kind of tracking that would allow. So a lot of people didn't take the data structuring plunge because they didn't see the value. And I think it's incumbent on big mouths like me to start to paint the picture of what it could mean if you do have enterprise-wide agents. Frankly, I don't know that that's a 2026 thing. I think you'll see that next year. I think the tooling will get better. And by tooling, I mean, again, stuff in Microsoft, stuff in Azure, stuff in some startups and so on. It just needs to be a little easier than it is now, both to clean the data up and then to do smart things with it. So I think that this chasm people think they have between being able to use AI and not is more about getting used to using it and having your own intuition about what's an AI-shaped problem. There's a lot of benefit where we are right now. I do think everybody should be saying, okay, fine, but it's going to take 12 to 18 months to clean our data up, so we should get started now, so that in 2027, 2028, as the tooling gets there, you can do smart stuff. So, we're not really talking about the big kind of enterprise-wide agents yet, but that's going to be a massive unlock when it happens. The degree to which people will know their business down to the change order, I think will be transformational. We're just not quite there yet.
Yeah, and I think everyone's on their journey with collecting that data and organizing it in a way that, AI can operate on top of. And I think we're even starting to see some agents that help you clean that data, which is
That's right. That's
exciting.
right.
Hugh, we've identified a few use cases, from the job site, in the back in the office, and we're talking about a lot of important, sensitive data at times. We're talking about important tasks that agents might be completing or at least supplementing. And I'd love to hear from you a little bit about what makes an agent both reliable and effective.
Yeah, and I hinted at this earlier, so I'll dig in a little bit more. The first thing is like I said, the rule of thumb is, could you list all of the inputs, and then could you define what good looks like? So the agent it's not going to have some input it's never seen before. It's not going to see some form or whatever that it's never seen before, and then it can, on its own, it can say, okay, this is good enough. I'm ready to pass it back to Dave. So that's kind of point one. Related to that, and almost an implication of that is an agent that can quote unquote do everything. Like when you hear these big people making promises about agents that can do full workflows, it's a I don't think it's a good idea. And experience has proven that having one agent that does that is a bad idea, for a couple of reasons. One of which is just, how do you say what good looks like when there are interim steps where it'll just never get there? Does that make sense? So there are
Yeah.
interim steps that you haven't said this is what good looks like at step 1 of 4, and therefore it keeps going. It's never going to get the end right, certainly not within the time frame you care about. So it's a good idea to think about breaking agents or processes into steps. Now, the funny thing about process mapping, that and the other thing you hear people talk about, you got to map your process. I don't know the people that say that apparently haven't worked at real companies before, because most companies and most people couldn't tell you and be right what's literally step by step what they do. Now, there's some audited processes and there's some regulatory processes where that's a little less true, but generally we kind of know the rules, and we definitely know what good looks like, and we know what the inputs are, but we kind of and we know some of the steps that you have to do. Like we know our job, but you kind of make it up a little on the way, and you adjust, and that today I'm going to do a little more of this, whatever. So the idea of discovering a map of a process is not, it's not a waste of time. It's just it's unhelpful. Better is to say what would be the steps. Now, again, if you have those somewhere because you're one of those companies that really drilled into an SOP, that just tends not to be true. There have been studies across industries that say exactly this. Again, in 30 years, I can tell you I've never had an SOP that I followed perfectly. Way better is to do what I said before: is what's coming into this, what are the guardrails, and what does it need to look like at the end? And then you say, all right, well then I can create a series of steps and think about what in here we might make an agent out of, if that makes sense. So rule number one is what I just said about evaluations and about making sure you're only automating things that are only making an agent for things where you can do that. The other one is just think about making it smaller, certainly in the beginning, because the other thing is a bigger agent is a lot harder to get to be really performant. You've just got more things that could go wrong. It's just like software. If you can make the problem smaller and say, for now, we're going to automate this thing and I'm going to lock it, and I know what it's going to give me to the next step. Maybe in 6 months, you say, hey, we know enough now that we can combine these two into one agent, or however you want to do it. But I think making things reliable in today's world is, how do we make it the smallest, I don't know about smallest, but bias towards being a smaller step, make it reliable, and then lock it in, and then think about what to do next. Because again, you don't have a team of machine learning specialists, you don't have a team of agent specialists. And if you do, God bless, and you're spending money on that, but you probably don't. So it's, instead of making it into a gargantuan problem, make it a smaller one so you can get a win on the board, and then do another one. And each time you do it, you get better, and so on and so forth. But I would encourage people to think like that. That's both reliable but also achievable. As I say, that if you've got too many variables going in, that means you have to play with all of them, and one thing goes wrong and then another, and so on. So if you can make the problem smaller, it also is a whole lot easier to write your evaluation. And I've used that word evaluation a few times. It's kind of a term of art for this, where it's the document or documents that the agent uses to say, yes, this is good enough.
Yeah, and Hugh, I like that you're kind of breaking it down into the components. We launched our first 5 agents into the product just over 3 weeks ago, and as we were going about, looking at the opportunity, looking at the problems that we could solve with agents for our users, we had these, big dreams of saying, "Hey, we're gonna, automate your whole workforce plan, and you're gonna have, all this work and time savings completed." And when we boiled it down to the components and to kind of all of the actions that it takes to have a strong workforce plan for your organization, it is immensely complex. It takes a ton of human judgment, a ton of context that just lives up in people's heads. And so we thought about, okay, where can we take, some of those smaller moments, and where can we maybe support with building a singular project team? Where can we support with finding one individual and finding them the right next assignment for them to work on? And in doing so, one of the things that we're really focused on in terms of making sure they're reliable is explaining the why behind some of those suggestions. And the agent's going to look at a whole bunch of different data points about your workforce, what the availability and the distance from the project and the experience. And we want to surface those so that when you're getting an agentic recommendation, you're understanding why that person was surfaced. They can do the thinking for you to a certain point. The user has the final judgment call. But I think that in terms of showing reliability, being able to trust AI, understanding how it got there is really important. And I'd even just go a step further of kind of picking up on a thread that you were mentioning, Hugh, is just that like ongoing iteration too. The first team that you get might not be the team that you want to go forward with. So figuring out how to follow up a prompt, or figuring out how you need to tweak maybe some customizations on the types of teams you build, for example, if you're a Bridget user. And so all of these things I think are important as we're all on this journey of figuring out how we incorporate agents into our day-to-day. I'm sure we have a few, leaders on the call here, leaders from all different walks of the type. And I'm curious, how should leaders think about evaluating agents, Hugh?
Well, I'm going to key off of something you mentioned a moment ago about judgment. So there's a few things. One of them is how do I make my people have more time to think? And related to that is, we as humans, we take for granted how much judgment we're doing in even things that seem mundane. So it's important when you think about applying agents to remember that you're paying people for their judgment. And the point of someone being, mid-level or senior is they're applying a lot of judgment, sometimes in subtle ways that you only realize when you try to automate it and you're like, how come this is so bad? So I think a way of thinking about agents and AI generally is making the most of the judgment and experience of your people, as opposed to trying to replace it and hoping that you get so much efficiency out of it. Because I think efficiency and effectiveness sometimes are at odds with each other. There certainly becomes a point when they are. And a great example from one of the best technologists right now is Elon Musk, right? So I think it's 2023, something like that. He tried to automate an entire factory for I think it was the Tesla Model 3. And he realized, almost lost the business, because he realized that he'd overestimated how much robots could do and how much AI could do, and also underestimated how much judgment and input humans do when they're doing certain things. And this is an assembly line where, it's like, oh, they're just moving the same part from here to there. Well, actually, not really. There's a lot in there. So I think that as leaders, you look at agents as, especially in the short run, areas to free up time for your team to think, to talk to people, to go to the site, to all the things that you never could have AI do, and you can't really even include that information except maybe some transcripts. But that's what makes a job site run, right? Is calling the sub and making sure they're going to show up with as many people as you want, or calling the vendor, whatever. My point is that human to human is often what really drives something forward, and AI can't do that. So how can we give people more time back to think about those interactions, have those interactions, respond to those interactions? So they're spending less time grinding on documents, less time gathering things, less time checking things. Ultimately, even if the AI does the checking, I really liked your point about essentially explainability. So, you're going to want to make sure that whatever an agent does, it's giving you some way to check it. That's kind of obvious, but It's worth remembering that I want to be able to check it, and I also don't want to have a PhD to be able to check it. I want it to be dead simple so I can see immediately, yes, it worked, and here's why it worked, or here's what it came back with. The other thing is that agents are often going to be an input to a human process. So keeping in mind what we've learned from construction tech about user interfaces, like AI can spin up, the Gettysburg Address, and you don't need that. So keeping in mind that not just what we've automated, but is the output something that we've really tried to make as useful as possible to whoever is going to consume it, so that they can do it quickly, they can find problems, there's contrast, stuff like that. The good thing is that spinning up user interfaces now is as easy as telling another agent what you want, whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or even Copilot. So I think that as you think about that as a leader, that's how I would think about it. Is your most precious resource is the expertise and judgment of your people, and agents are a great way to say, I'm going to pull away the things that prevent them from applying that judgment and experience. Giving them more time back, giving them more information. One of the things that not so much agents, but the chatbots can do, or assistants, is have the second pair of eyes, so that their judgment is all, they can stress test it without calling somebody, which is quicker. So yeah, I would think of it almost, agents are not the center of your analysis. They're the center of your analysis is your team's expertise. How are we then saying, all right, based on that, how's this stuff helping us? And you think about what Bridget's doing, right? A lot of this is you're automating things, and then they make judgments on it. Like they look at the team and they may know something that Bridget doesn't, because there was some conversation or whatever, just wasn't part of the data they gave you. That makes them say, no, we need someone like this, or that person. I happen to know that they've got leave coming up, whatever. That may be in your product, but my point is, construction's loaded with conversations that weren't captured. So, keeping in mind that AI's job is to just give people more, so that and more time and more information, so they can apply all that and get the job done.
Yeah, get the job done. That's what matters at the end of the day.
One thing, if I may, one thing that is also overlooked is, because of the fact that these tools are not static. The one thing that leaders do need to know is that you're going to need to think about governance in a way you never have before. Before, the governance was really keeping the emails working and so on, but this is a little more involved than that, and it's also less technical.
Yeah.
So someone has to keep an eye on how the agents are performing, and that's a dashboard. It's not technical, but nevertheless, it has become more of a thing than it was before, and that's going to become more true, almost like HR for agents. So just that's going to become more of an issue.
Popping back in here, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Just want to say thank you for the great conversation up to this point. I've been making my own notes, and I'm sure everyone else here has been jotting down some things too. So I think we have time for some questions as promised. Hugh and Dave, are you good to tackle a few questions?
Happy to.
Awesome. Okay, number one question. This one's probably more for Hugh. Do you have any examples of where you've seen agents fail? So, maybe someone was a little bit premature in trying to, force some agentic workflow or something. I'd just love to hear any examples or stories around that.
Yeah, nothing in production, but I can tell you how they tend to fail. There's two big ways. One of them is an upfront failure, where it just wasn't tuned, or the evaluation or the process wasn't kind of worked out enough. And that's just a question of spending time testing it enough. And it is really tedious. But that's kind of failure mode number one, is just, and there's two ways that can go. One of them, as I say, is you didn't have the time or the expertise to just keep iterating till it got good enough. Related to that, though, is trying to automate or make an agent out of something that really isn't ready to be an agent, because you can't define good enough, or there's random inputs that maybe you forgot about that kind of throw it off. That's kind of number one, and that's almost a pre-publication failure. The other one is, agents will, as they operate, they will be making notes with them. A good one anyway, and this is all of them now, will be making notes about how it performed, so it can continue to improve and so on. And what can happen is they'll drift. So it starts to collect its own kind of record of its own performance and so on. And that can distract the model a little bit. So the reason governance is so important is that the agent itself can drift over time and with use. So someone has to keep an eye on it. And this is this is just like most software. You can make a dashboard of how it's performing and so on. And even token use can be an indicator. If it's suddenly burning a lot of tokens, it means it keeps failing to reach good enough because it has to keep trying. That's one of the things I didn't talk about before, is the way these things really work is there's a loop where it tries and then it tests against its evaluation. And then if it fails, it goes back and understands why it failed and says, okay, try it again, but now I've learned something. So those are the two ways. One of them is during the publication or the creation process, just not giving it enough testing, and especially with people that didn't build it. This is like classic software 101, is the people that made a thing never always underestimate how creative users are at new ways of playing with something. So they're going to do things that you didn't think, they're going to give it inputs that you didn't expect, and so on. So that's kind of part one, and part two is the drift thing.
Awesome. Great answers to those questions, to that question. We had another question just come in that I think is kind of interesting. It is in response to kind of earlier conversation that was talking about process mapping. This comment question, but you're welcome to weigh in. They say, I do think you need to start with kind of a clean or an optimized process before automating, because the last thing you want to do is automate a bad process.
100%. 100%. So to be clear on what I was saying is, going and asking people what their process is can be really frustrating because they often don't have a clean one they already have. To automate the thing, you absolutely have to go in and say, all right, well, would these steps work? So the point I'm making is, you're often, I wouldn't say inventing, but you're like crystallizing what was there. Because as I say, most people don't have steps that are sitting on their desk that they follow. Again, there's some exceptions to that, but it's a little bit more about the decision to say, okay, there's two parts to this. One is, again, the process itself tends to not be that stable. There's some pieces that are, but a lot of times it's you're just doing it. But the other one is, if you were to ask a human, they're going to include mini steps that the brain just does. And if you're trying to automate it, you might have to invent some steps that are clean enough, to use that word, or finite enough that you could automate them. So you may have to break it down further than a human would, because again, we're doing stuff in our brain, or we're just applying experience and so on. So the comment is 100% right. My point wasn't that you don't need that. My point was, don't consider it discovery. Consider it half discovery and half crystallization, because they probably don't have it in their minds as clean boxes that go, step, step, step. And again, if you're going to want to apply an agent to it, you very often are going to have to invent interim steps that are automatable.
Yeah, that's a great response. Another question here. So obviously, like you mentioned, using certain words like agent right now, obviously AI was kind of the big term of the last couple of years, and this year it's agent. A lot of software vendors, they say they have agents. How should a company, a leader, approach kind of wading through, or like figuring out, okay, is this an actual agent? You kind of talked about this earlier, but how should people kind of think about that vetting process?
I'm not sure that they should care. Honestly, I don't know that the IT team or the innovation team, maybe they dig in on that, but I don't think it matters if it's an agent or it's something, or a ham sandwich. What matters is it reliably doing what you want and adding value to your team? The metric should be, is this better than without it, and is it worth whatever the pain and money is? And also, what value is it? If it's just faster, it's not that that's bad. It's just, okay, is it materially giving my people time back? Is it helping them prepare better? Is it doing something to add value to the customer and to the company? That should be the metric, whatever you call it. Because as we said, people are a little sloppy with their labels, and someone's going to say an agent is something it's not. And the other thing is, we didn't talk about, but I mentioned, if you want to automate a workflow, you're going to have multiple agents, which sometimes they call them swarms, which is scary, and sometimes they call them fleets, which sounds super cool, but it doesn't matter. Groups of agents that are managed by another one on top. You could call that whole thing an agent if you want. In fact, some people do. Like, I wouldn't get hung up on the words. What matters is understanding some of what we talked about a moment ago, is that not everything is automatable. You don't want to automate away judgment. Just because you could automate it doesn't mean you should, because people sometimes add real value. That means you miss that upside. It's a little bit like, you hire somebody, they're not going to be as good as the senior person was at doing it, but the senior person can't do everything. So you know that you've kind of capped how good the output will be, but now you can have 10 people doing it. That's like 10, that's much more true with agents, where they're not going to be as good at certain things, some things, as a human might, but you can do enough more of it that it might be worth that trade-off. But you have to decide if that trade-off is one you want to make, because they're not going to be as creative as a human. They're not going to be as insightful. They can't pick up the phone and ask somebody, hey, could I do this a little better, whatever. So that, there's a ton of things you can automate, but I do think being thoughtful about and keeping an eye on whether certain metrics have gone down because we automated something and we're missing that judgment that humans add at that little step. So it really depends. But again, I wouldn't get hung up on whether something is an agent or not, unless they're charging a lot more for it, because that happens too.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a good call out. I'm looking at the list of questions. I think you've kind of touched on everything. Just wanted to kind of do one final reminder that we did record today's webinar. So you can keep an eye on your email, and we'll send you a link to the recording in the next couple of days. But also, Hugh, I wanted to give you the chance before we sign off to maybe just leave one final takeaway or recommendation with everyone here.
That's great. So, having lived through the internet, what I would make an analogy here is this is kind of like the internet in 2002, where we didn't have broadband yet. So we're kind of like that with the data centers and all the stuff that's being built out. We're at a point now where tokens are expensive and everyone's freaking out about that. And I promise that will go away because every infrastructure overshoots and they're going to make it a commodity. And I don't know when, but it'll happen. I don't know, 18 months, something like that. Consider that where you are now is the beginning. This is back to the point that Dave and I made, is that it's not quite the beginning, but it's still pretty darn early. Um, this is a process that we can't fully predict because someone has to invent the specific things you use, even if we kind of know where the tech is going. We don't know where we'll be in a year. I will tell you the two companies, the OpenAI and Anthropic, between now and their IPO, they're going to go nuts in innovating. So there will be a lot of change and a lot of new stuff. And then we have overseas competition and so on. All of that to say, it's a very good time to be paying attention to this. It's a very good time to be getting the reps in and starting to work on it. And know that the things you learn now are almost definitely going to be useful no matter where the tech goes, because you're thinking about how this fits in our business, not getting hung up on again, how to build an agent or whatever. That's the thing to focus on is how does this help us? How might it help us? Let's get going with it. I do think everybody should be really focusing on getting their data in a more structured way, because as this matures, you'll start to find some really, really cool uses for it. So that would be my takeaway is, we're in year 3 or 4 of probably a 15-year journey, which is crazy if you think about it. It's like, but it's been nuts for 3 years. And we don't know what's coming next, but it'll be a glorious future.
I love it. Very exciting. Dave, do you have a final takeaway or anything you'd want to leave with everyone?
Yeah, I think that I would just like to say that AI is here. It's going to continue to be here, and I encourage everyone on the call to look for ways to bring it into their workflows and hopefully make their lives easier. I would be regretting it if I didn't say that I'd love if folks wanted to try out Bridget's agents, understand how we can make your lives easier when it comes to workforce planning. And if you have any questions, you can simply respond to the email that Daniel will send out later today. We'd be happy to answer anything about the agents, show you more about them, because we want to ultimately provide value to our customers. And we're early stages with this too. We have a long journey ahead, and feedback is how we make things better. So I also just like to say thanks to Hugh for joining me on our conversation today.
Thanks for having me. This has been great.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you to both of you and everyone else. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye now.